Hey, welcome to another APIsec University webinar. I'm really excited to see you all here today. We're going to be talking about PCI and the brand new DSS 4.0 standard. As a lot of you know, this is a new standard came out last year and becomes mandatory in just about 5 weeks from now. So definitely a good time to be talking about this. And great to see everybody saying hello in the chat. Um, Hopefully I sound okay. I've got this nasty cold that's been lasting for like a month, so apologize if I keep downing the cough drops here. But really pleased to have you all here and to talk about PCI and what's oh my God, Riza, 2 a.m. Thanks for joining us. Yuka from Finland. This is amazing. I always love to see all our international crowd here. Hopefully my background isn't mirrored or anything funky. That isn't a virtual background. That's actually real TV. I'm sort of low tech that way. Anyways, so we're going to talk about API security for PCI compliance. If you haven't seen it, we have a course on this right on APIsec University. We're going to cover a lot of that material and more here on today's session. So this is normally our webinars are more conversational. Today, I'm going to go through a lot of content, a lot of material. Definitely welcome the questions as we go along. Just to be real clear, I am not a QSA, not any of that kind of stuff, but I've spent a whole lot of time in the API security market, as you know, and really looking deep into the DSS 4.0 requirements and really trying to extract, where the relevance is for APIs. And it's a lot more than just where it says the words or the letters A, P, and I. And so that's what I want to talk about here today, because really, I think the goal with PCI isn't just to tick the box and make the auditor go away, but to actually up level your organization's security. And I think PCI is a pretty interesting regulation in that it's so very specific, right? It actually tells you exactly what you need to do, as opposed to things like HIPAA, which say, you got to make sure you protect, healthcare information, right? Or things like that. So, well, welcome everybody. Let's dive right in here. And first thing I always like to do is kind of set the stage, right? Like, why are we even talking about this? And you've probably seen this slide before, but why is API security a thing? Well, it's really a thing because APIs have taken over the internet, right? 83+%, probably more than 90% of the internet is API traffic. Someone asked me yesterday, what's not API traffic? And I was actually kind of stumped. Like, what website's not powered by APIs these days? Maybe it's close to 100. Who knows? APIs are definitely under attack. Gartner's been saying this for years, and you'll see the evidence here in a second. And we could do a whole lot better in terms of securing our APIs, right? In the realm of testing, only 4% of testing is security oriented testing. Tayfun, I bet we could find a link to the Gartner report. You would need a Gartner subscription, so but you might be able to find a copy of it somewhere on the internet. So that makes for ripe conditions for APIs. The other reason attackers love APIs is a lot of organizations spend a whole lot of time securing the front end, right? That web and mobile app, they authenticate users there, they filter data, they limit what you can do, they show you certain buttons but not other buttons. But what attackers are doing is just going right around that front end, hitting the API directly, and what they're finding are often over permissioned APIs that return too much data, have access to functionality that isn't available in the UI, expose logic flaws, and the like. So relying on that UI to be your security enforcer is not a good strategy. We really gotta secure at the API level, or even back at the application logic level as well. And then, so let's talk about what's happening in the real world. And this is just a sampling, right? We're not going to go through all this stuff, right? We've got whole courses that talk about real world breaches. But I just want you to see, like, API breaches are really a thing. They happen a lot. They're resulting in pretty significant data loss, data exposure, and other forms of harm. All right. And so I think the PCI Council was spot on to tackle APIs in DSS 4.0. And so yeah, that's why we want to talk about it, and we want to share, like, what does the 4.0 standard have that relates to APIs. And thank you, Miguel, for the comment. Yeah, Postman has some pretty nice statistics as well. Pretty much all of them basically say APIs are kind of on fire, and we need to do better. So let's dive into DSS 4.0. So the 4.0 is the first new release or update to the data security standard in something like 5 or 6 years. The prior version was 3.2.1. If you were to go look up that version and do a Control F and look for API, you won't find any single mention of APIs in the 3.2.1 standard. If you do that on 4.0, you'll see it all over the place, right? So it's definitely, a first-class citizen in 4.0. 4.0 is a great big document. It's a whole lot bigger than 3.2.1. It's something like 2.5 times the size. So there's a lot of new stuff in 4.0, and we want to make sure that you don't overlook what's in there for APIs. And one of the things is APIs are really foundational to how we build our application. So even if it doesn't say API in the standard explicitly, it still has a whole lot of relevance. And we're going to point that out here. And the thing I like to say for folks is, listen, if APIs are in scope for your attackers, it's got to be in scope for you, right? So don't try to find, like, just meet the letter of the law and not the intent. The goal here is really to up level your security, right? And to make sure that you're protecting your organization from all those breaches that we saw on the prior slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through section by section of the DSS standard. I'm going to use direct screenshots from the standard and let you see what the actual language looks like. First thing to hit on, of course, is the timeline. This is a DSS graphic. The 4.0 standard was released in early 2022, so just close to 2 years ago, and that started the transition period. So as of Q2 2022, you could start to certify against the 4.0 standard, but come March 31, so 5 weeks from now, you must comply with the 4.0 standard. That's when the transition period ends. I've had some people suggest that's when it starts. That's not how it works. It's when you need to be compliant. There are some standards or some requirements in 4.0 that have an extended timeline, so they give you another year, but that's kind of exceptional. The vast majority of what's in 4.0 becomes mandatory at the end of next month. So let's dive in to the sections. I'm going to go through probably 7 or 8, maybe even 10 different sections here of DSS, kind of rapid fire. I want you to get the feel for where APIs are relevant. In some cases, it's significant. Sometimes it's more of a mention. And then, as I said, you can always go check out our course if you want to learn more. And my colleague Christine, maybe you can throw up the link to the course here if anyone hasn't seen it or wants to join. We have a lot of resources that we're going to share here in this call as well. So stick around. We've got worksheets and workshops that you can request, and some pretty cool news for what's coming up next. So let's dive right in. Thank you, Christine. There it is. So 227 is pretty basic, admin console access. So basically here what they're saying is you got to encrypt all that admin console access, and then they actually mention specifically make sure that includes API access to the console, right? There's generally a feeling like, we focus on the UIs and we don't always think about the API. So make sure that API access is also encrypted. And this is the first time in the document that you actually see the word API, right? Or the letters AP and I. And so there you go. Pretty basic there. The next one is section 6, and this is really the meat of DSS from an application perspective and APIs. And this has to do with the secure development of software and applications here. And there are a couple of specific things here that I want to call out. Let me close this out of the way. Here we go. Bespoke and custom software. That's language that you're going to see throughout DSS 4.0. right? And this basically means, all that logic, all that application functionality that you are developing in-house for your business, for your for your services, right? And it talks about in 6.2, you're going to see a lot of requirements around bespoke and custom software is developed securely. And in 6.3, security vulnerabilities are identified and addressed, right? And so wherever you see the words bespoke and custom software, it's not just the code that you're writing, but it's all the interfaces, right? We certainly would consider our UIs, our apps, as in scope for all that custom and bespoke software. Same is true for APIs, right? So even if it doesn't say API, you need to think about it whenever it's talking about bespoke and custom software. Okay, so that's just the high level on 6.2. So let's go a level deeper. So 6.2.1 basically deals with secure software development. And here, what the standard talks about is, developing that bespoke and custom software in a secure fashion according to, sort of industry standards. And what does it mean for APIs, right? Well, what they're saying is you want your security to be woven into the development of the application. That security isn't a bolt-on function that you worry about it at the very end. And so the best practices here is understand API risks and make sure that you're mitigating those risks as early as possible, right? That developers are aware and can develop more resilient, secure secure APIs and secure code, right? So, all right, that's pretty high level. Let's get more specific. I love this one that they have annual developer training as part of the requirement, right? So the DSS or PCI Council wants to ensure that the people creating and defining and developing APIs in all our applications get the necessary security training, right? Not just good coding, but how to make sure that those applications are secure, right? So every 12 months to get training on security relevant to their job functions, including security testing tools and how to detect vulnerabilities, right? And so this is really important, right? So we need to make sure that developers understand API risks, how to prevent those risks, and how to test for those vulnerabilities, right? So maybe this is a good time, Christina, to throw up the workshop. So we do a lot of workshops with organizations all over the world to help raise awareness about API security risks, how APIs are getting attacked, and what are the best practices to prevent exposure in your organization. And it's a really great opportunity. It takes about 1 hour. You can invite anyone you want. There's no cost. It's all free. No sales pitches, but it's a great way to raise awareness in the organization, to give those developers that training they need to understand how APIs get attacked and how you can write secure, more resilient APIs as well. So definitely invite you to check out the workshop series that we do. Okay, so let's go. Software code review is the next one. Okay, so now we're talking about how do we make sure that the code that we're developing is free of vulnerabilities and the like. So let's look at the highlights here, right? So bespoke and custom software is reviewed prior to release, right, to identify any issues, right, vulnerabilities, good coding practices, and so forth, right? And it even talks about here at the very bottom, you see that check the application's behavior to detect logical vulnerabilities. Okay, so you don't see API. Actually, you do see API here. It actually mentions, right, looking at the APIs, the third-party APIs that you're using, right? But it's looking for you to identify these vulnerabilities before they get released. So this is very much in that notion of shift left, right? Let's ensure that we are testing and validating and reviewing our code ahead of production to look for those vulnerabilities and make sure that includes your APIs as well, right? And I love that they flag logical vulnerabilities. These are very difficult to find with sort of classic vulnerability scanners, web app scanners, code scanners, and that sort of thing. Logic vulnerabilities aren't going to show up in a CVE, right? Or some sort of report, right, from a major vendor. These are unique to your organization. Wherever you have logic vulnerabilities, the risk is that your APIs are going to expose those as well, right? And so if you haven't seen our fundamentals course, we talk a lot about real world breaches there, and you'll see a lot of logic flaws, right? This is what attackers like to look for, right? Some sort of gap in what your application allows, and APIs are a great way to exploit those, right? So it's really what DSS is going for here is making sure that you're evaluating your code and looking for those types of vulnerabilities, and make sure you include the APIs when you're doing that. Okay. 624 actually goes a little bit deeper here into looking for common vulnerabilities. I call this the OWASP section of DSS 4.0. So you're going to see a lot of things in here, like looking for authentication exploits, bypassing authorization, right? Can I see somebody else's data, right? Cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, looking at business flows, misconfigs. It even flags things like attacks on business logic, right, which we talked about a minute ago, and even manipulation of APIs, right? So this is extremely relevant to APIs. They are actually mentioning it here directly. They even talk about things like detect this as early as possible, shifting security left, right? And really, encouraging organizations to wire security into the software lifecycle, right? And get out of this mode of API or security is something that happens at the end, but rather to integrate security into the application DNA. So again, we really recommend making sure your developers understand API risks, but make sure you have that ability to test for these types of things, right? Injections and cross-site scripting, but also authorization flaws, authentication. Do we have endpoints that are left wide open, right? OWASP number 2, we see lots of breaches happen from that. We see a lot of authorization breaches where user A can access user B's data. Do we have excess data exposure, right? Our API is returning too much data, but we're filtering it in the UI. That's not a good strategy. You want to make sure you filter it in the API, right? So that it doesn't return any more information than is necessary. All right, that's 624. 631 is kind of classic vulnerability management. So you want to make sure that you are doing the sort of traditional scanning of common vulnerabilities, right? So using sort of well-known off-the-shelf vulnerability scanners. But just recognize, like, those kinds of scanners are not going to find a lot of API things, right? Most of the scanners out there don't do a whole lot at the API level, but especially at the logic level, right? They're not going to identify logic flaws or authorization flaws or unsecured endpoints or excess data exposure, right? So do the vulnerability management, but also employ things like bug bounties or automated testing, and make sure that that covers your APIs here as well. So that's 631. 632, this is just good blocking and tackling. You got to know what you've got, right? So develop an API inventory and make sure that inventory includes all your APIs, right? We hear a lot of security teams say we don't even know what APIs we've got, right? And to me, that's not unusual to hear that, and kind of reeks of a governance problem, right? If you've got shadow or rogue APIs that are getting stood up that no one knows about, that's a governance issue. And we really strongly recommend that you get that under control. And one of the best ways to do that is to employ something like a centralized API gateway, right? So no APIs go live that haven't gone through a standard approval process, that get managed in a centrally controlled fashion, that go through all the necessary gates, testing and approvals and reviews and the like, before they ever go live. But you definitely need to have a comprehensive inventory of all your software, and that has to include your APIs. And it also needs to include documentation, right? So it's not enough to say we've got all these APIs. You need to know what they're doing, right? This is really critical from an API reuse perspective, but it's also critical in terms of security, right? That documentation tells the security team, what does this API do? What data is it touching? What functionality does it have? How are we protecting it? How do users have to authenticate? Who built it? Where is it running? All of that kind of thing needs to be factored into your software inventory. And one of the best ways to get that kicked off is just simply to go walk over and talk to the dev team, right? Yes, you can plug in lots of tools and technologies and sensors all over the network. That's one approach to building an inventory. But I always recommend just go talk to dev, right? They probably have a pretty good idea of the APIs that they're creating. And it'll actually help build that relationship that's been missing in many organizations between the security team and engineering. All right. And James, yes, agreed. Manual and automated testing, both recommended. Automated is really critical because you can't manually test every release, right? A pen test is going to happen once or twice a year, but you're probably going to release code 52 times a year. So that's an awful lot of code that's not getting tested. So you got to bring automation into the mix here as well. All right. Moving along. I blended two of these here. 641 and 642 are both pretty related. It has to do with attack protection. So for the next 12 months, you've got a choice of either doing automated vulnerability scanning, right? Reviewing web applications for vulnerabilities, or do automated blocking, right? Threat detection and blocking. And actually by next year, this becomes mandatory. So for a year, you've got a choice. And next year you have to employ automated blocking. The implications here for APIs is simply like, that vulnerability detection has to include your APIs, right? You can't rely strictly on web app scanning and things like that. You've got to be testing those APIs as well. It's just another interface. The I in UI is the same as the I in API, right? It's just another interface. It's meant for machines instead of eyeballs. So you got to make sure that vulnerability testing incorporates your APIs. And from a blocking perspective, the recommendation is something like a web app firewall. And everyone should be using a web app firewall. It's pretty mature technology at this point. And a lot of the web app firewalls are becoming more API savvy, right? We're seeing a lot of activity from the major vendors out there, and F5 and Barracuda and Imperva. They're all starting to add API logic to their firewall. So that's great. It is your last line of defense, though, right? So I wouldn't just count on the WAF to protect you from all of those different kinds of threats, right? And frankly, as you saw, many of those breaches involved millions, if not hundreds of millions of records harvested. So good old-fashioned rate limiting can be more art than science. And attackers are pretty good at trying to evade that rate limiting. So don't count on that as being your sole level or layer of security, right? You definitely want to be identifying those vulnerabilities, fixing them before they ever even make it into production. Okay, so that's 641 and 642, and that kind of rounds out the section 6 of the DSS standard, and that really covers like how you're developing and looking for vulnerabilities in your code, right? All that bespoke and custom software, which must include all your APIs. So you've seen APIs mentioned by name, but even where it's not, I hope you're getting the message, right? Like it is integral to your applications. It's integral to your custom and bespoke software. So it needs to be front and center for your PCI compliance efforts. Okay, there are a couple more here, 7, 10, and 11. Here, let me look at Rohan's question. We're using 24/7 monitoring of the API and Snyk-based DevSecOps pipeline to test every 6 months. Is it sufficient? Well, Rohan, how often are you pushing to production is what I'd ask you, right? If it's more than every 6 months, then I would say no, it's not, right? It means that you're pushing code out there that hasn't really been vetted, right? And we're going to talk about it here in the sort of second half of like, what can you do in the way of automated testing? But for sure, right? You don't want to be pushing, you wouldn't push code out that hasn't been functionality tested, right? You want to make sure it works. I think that you really need to be security testing as well. And that's where automation comes in. All right, number 7 is strong access control. So This is really about who has access, what they can do, what they have access to. So one of the things that we really strongly recommend is RBAC testing, right? Looking at what roles you have, what permissions they have, and what they have access to. This has been a tricky thing in the past, like how can security teams test and monitor for this stuff? This is a great opportunity for automation, and we can certainly tell you a whole lot more about that. I'm glad. Thank you for the comment there, Dragon. So yeah, just make sure that you've got a technique to know what roles you have, what permissions they've got, and to detect drift, right? So this is what sort of keeps security teams up at night. People tampered with or modify permissions without your knowledge, and now all of a sudden, data is getting exposed to people who really shouldn't have access to it. So this is a great opportunity for automated testing. Number 10 is logging and monitoring. I come from a SIM background, so this is some area I'm very familiar with. We talk a lot about server logging and network logging and all that kind of stuff. Make sure you're collecting logs from the APIs as well. Your gateway is a perfect place to get this. It's really instrumental for understanding how the application and the APIs are being used. It's really critical information for incident response. So if you do suffer a breach or see some sort of abuse, that you can go back and retrace the steps and figure out what exactly happened in those incidents. All right, let me look at Giovanni. Following this timeline, next year will be great working year for people that know API in general. Yes, this is a great opportunity for folks looking to break into new careers. I think the success of APIsec University has revealed that there's a great big gap in API security knowledge and expertise. I think organizations will really have to step up their API game, and folks who've got this kind of training and certification will be in demand. Prince, yep, happy to share the slides as always. So just follow up and we can get these over to you. All right, so that's number 10, logging and monitoring. And then the last one I wanted to talk to you about is good old-fashioned security testing. So this is, I thought there would be more in the DSS, but here you go. Bespoke and custom software should be tested frequently. There you go. That's got to include your APIs. It's got to be tested ahead of production. And to, I can't remember whose comment it was about, is 6 months sufficient, Rohan? I don't know. I think you got to look at your organization and how frequently you're releasing. And I strongly recommend you don't push anything out there that hasn't been security tested. And we're going to talk here in a minute about like what kind of testing can you do that will dramatically improve your API security posture. From Ahmad, can you give high-level understanding of automation for RBAC validation? Yeah. Full disclosure, we have a technology over at APIsec AI. We don't talk about it a lot on our webinars or in the courses, but one of the things that it does is it takes every role that you've got and runs it against every endpoint, right? And it tells you which ones work, which ones don't, and it gives you an opportunity to say this is what it should be, and if anything deviates from that, you can know about it, right? So Ahmad, there is absolutely ways to automate RBAC testing. And monitoring and so forth. So I'll leave it at that. Come talk to me if you'd like to learn more about it. Okay, so I built an animated version of this, but you're going to just see the whole thing here. So we looked at those 50 plus breaches that I showed you at the beginning, right? All that long list of companies that have been breached through the APIs, and we mapped it to what was the core issue, or what were issues involved in those breaches, and where do they map to? And right, the tippity top is rate limiting, right? So anytime we saw millions of records being harvested, clearly there's some sort of rate limit issue, right? Just 2 weeks ago at Trello, right, 500 million email addresses were supplied to their endpoint, in which 15 million matched, and they got put up for sale. All that data got put up for sale on the dark web, right? So what we're seeing is, humongous volumes of requests not getting blocked and detected, right? So does that mean rate limiting is the problem? I don't think it's the source, right? If you weren't revealing useful data, it doesn't matter. I mean, you should still enforce rate limiting. It's a a harm on your network. It's a cost that you're incurring. But solving rate limiting doesn't prevent the core issue of too much data, logic flaws, exposure, and the like, right? So, and it also goes to show that all those companies probably had WAFs in place, right? And all those, hundreds of millions of records still got harvested, right? And it just shows that rate limiting is tough, right? You can't detect and block everything out there. So what was interesting is the next three things, broken authorization, broken authentication, and excess data exposure accounted for over 90% of all those breaches, some combination of these three, right? And it turns out that if you were to address these three things, you would have prevented 90% of those breaches, right? And so this is where we really strongly recommend that you focus. At least if you're just starting on your API security journey, then focus on these three things. It also happens to map exactly to OAuth 1, 2, and 3 for good reason, right? So broken authorization, what is that? Can Dan access Christine's records, right? This is an access control flaw. We see many examples of it. Whenever you see 100 million records exposed, it means somebody's accessing data that doesn't belong to them, right? And so that's what OAuth 1 is. OAuth 2 is broken authentication. It's not typically broken or weak or vulnerable. It's missing authentication. Like APIs are left wide open. 90% of the time, that's what we are seeing here in these breaches. Developers that didn't think this API would ever get discovered, they put it up there with no credentials, no security. It got discovered, and it had access to data that it shouldn't have exposed, which is OAuth number 3, right? Like, are our APIs returning more information than is required for that application? Are we returning the full record and then filtering in the UI, things like that? And it turns out if you can address these three things, you would have prevented 90% of those breaches that we saw in that list of breaches. Interestingly, the fifth item here, improper inventory management, which often is like APIs that we don't know about or outdated versions that should have been deprecated. This is where I throw things like rogue and shadow and unknown APIs, less than 10%, right? This tends to get way more than 10% of the attention. It's really important. You got to have a solid inventory, right? But in terms of actual breaches, where the real sort of bulk of the breaches are happening, it's in OAuth 1, 2, and 3, right? And it turns out that those things can pretty readily be detected with the right approaches, right? I see a lot of questions here, and I apologize, I'm not keeping up here. Just to let everyone know, we review all the questions after the show as well, so we'll make sure to follow up with you if we don't touch on them here. But please keep them coming, and we'll definitely make sure to touch on as many as we can here. Okay, so the next question I get is, okay, so what can you do here to address those 1, 2, and 3, right? So if you look at the life cycle of an API, right, from its birth, right, when we're defining a brand new API to when we no longer need it, right, when we are retiring or deprecating an API, right? So in the definition phase, that's where your governance has to kick in, right? Like, make sure you've got all the right stakeholders at the table. You're talking about what's the purpose of this API, doing a risk assessment. What data is it going to touch? How are we going to ensure that data is protected? And so we just get off on the right foot, right? In the development phase, you're going to do all your standard, code reviews and static analysis. But to be real, none of those breaches would have been prevented with better code analysis, right? These were things that really needed to be tested to be discovered. Testing, you've got your sort of legacy dynamic application testing tools, aren't very savvy on APIs, and you've got manual, right? Pen testing and bug bounties and things like that, which, as we've talked about, don't really keep up with the pace of development, right? And so this is what we're calling the security gap. It's the gap between when we're developing APIs and we're running APIs, right? And we're seeing this huge gap, that 4% figure in terms of testing. And then you get into runtime, right? You got your gateway, your WAF, your SIM, and things like that to monitor the APIs, which are great for enforcing authentication, traffic filtering, rate limiting, things like that. But it's your last line of defense, right? So the next thing we thought about was where can you detect those, OAuth 1, 2, and 3, right? And testing for authorization is not all that hard, right? Like literally just create a test where you log in as Dan and you try to access Christine's records, right? There you go. If that's successful, you've got yourself a BOLA flaw, right? OAuth number 1, right? And of course, think about all the permutation, not just that one single example, but not hard to create tests that simulate that, right? For authentication, right? Now we're looking for, most importantly, unsecured endpoints, right? Are we putting any endpoints out there that don't have authentication requirements on them? And if so, is that by design or is that a flaw, right? Now you can find these in runtime, in deployment, but wouldn't it be better to find that out before you ever go live, right? And then number 3 is data exposure, right? So test your APIs to see what data is coming back, right? And is it the right level of information for what the business case requires, right? Or are we relying on the UI to do that filtering for us, right? So you can achieve various of these at different stages of the life cycle, but all things equal, we highly recommend shifting left. I think most people would agree with that, in finding out these vulnerabilities before they can ever cause you any harm, right? And as you saw from the prior slide, if you can address these 3 things, you're well on your way to increasing the security of your APIs. And it's not to say the other 7 items in the top 10 aren't relevant. They're very relevant. Your testing should go well beyond these 3 things. But I just want to let you know, like, that's probably where your best ROI is in terms of security. And then people will ask me, how should you go about actually automating testing? There are a lot of tools, but the main objectives here is make it automated, meaning, yes, you can do your pen testing, but you gotta have automated testing in between, right? Make sure that every one of those releases is getting tested. Make it comprehensive, right? This is one of the limitations of manual testing is, if you've got 100, 200, 500, 1,000 endpoints, and you're looking at all these different attack vectors, that is probably going to add up to thousands of different of test scenarios, right? So you want to make sure that you're comprehensively testing every endpoint across all those different OWASP categories. And let's make it continuous, right? Let's wire it right into our software lifecycle in a CI/CD pipeline and things like that. Here are some names. I only throw this up because people ask me for it. All of these are free. They're community additions to these technologies. And if you want to learn more, please come talk to me, and I will tell you a whole lot more about this topic. So that is the presentation. Normally these are way more conversational, but you just got me today. Hoping that this was a valuable session. We've actually got a worksheet that basically takes a lot of what we've talked about here today and summarized it into, I don't know, 7 or 8 page worksheet. So it'll show you all those different sections and all the things that we talked about. So this is a really great place to a great summary for all the things that we've been talking about here. So for everyone that's wanted a copy of the slides, send me an email. We'll send you the slides. But this is a pretty good resource for you as well. And sorry that I've lost track of a lot of the questions here, but I wanted to thank you all. There's my email address, and I want to give you a little bit of a sneak peek on some stuff that we've got going on, and hopefully you're seeing in the handout section we've got that worksheet is there. One thing that we're doing, I'm going to throw this up right now, is we're running a survey. All right, so we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback on how you're approaching PCI and DSS 4.0 compliance. If you're a QSA, we'd like to understand your perspective. So if you've got, it's about 5-6 minutes to answer about 10 questions. We'd surely love it, and we'll share the results and let you know what we're finding here. So definitely check that out. And I do want to give a plug for something really cool and exciting that's going to come out in 2 weeks, which is a survey we've been running for the last couple of months, which is an overall API security market survey. Some really amazing findings, and we've got close to 2,000 submissions on this survey. So a lot of data. We've been crunching it and slicing and dicing it. So we're going to present those results on March 7th. So there you go. There's the link to register for the March 7th webinar. And we're going to go through all the findings from this survey, right? So thank you to everybody who has contributed to that. I definitely hope to see you on the next webinar in 2 weeks, when we're going to go through all of the results. And there's some pretty interesting findings in there, and some of the stuff that that we've given you a little bit of sneak peek here today. So that is Miguel. Can we go over the OWASP API or the AI top 10? Yeah, we actually have a course coming out on AI security, so stay tuned for that. And we'll certainly be going through that. We had a webinar back in December on LLM top 10 as well. And so we also have some other interesting announcements. Come Tuesday, I think it's Tuesday, we're going to announce some pretty big news for APIsec University. So I'll leave it at that. Stay tuned to our socials, LinkedIn and Twitter, for really exciting announcement there as well. So I think with that, we'll close out today's session. More of a lecture style today, so apologies for not getting to everybody's question, but I promise you we'll follow up with you one-on-one. And with that, thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate you all being such great APIsec University supporters. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And until then, have a great day and take care of yourself. Bye-bye, everybody.